Okay, I've started now. Okay, so I'm here with Paul Dempsey of the Independent Scientific Advocacy Group, who is a mathematical scientist and who is responsible for the number crunching and for modeling, and is really, really helpful because helps us anticipate what's happening, understand what's happening, because of course there are loads of numbers flying around the place. And I think it can be quite difficult to try and understand what's going on and, what happens in a model and what are we talking about when we're talking about the numbers going up and down and making projections. So we're going to try and explain some of that and step you through that. So Paul, thanks a million for giving a bit of your time. So the first thing I wanted to ask you was just in terms of the data that you're using. So what kind of, when you're making those graphs that we see, what is the information that you're using there?
Well, the only thing we have available is what's out in public. And that's, I suppose, has been one good thing and one impressive thing so far is, while we can have some complaints about the data, they've actually done it in this country pretty well, because it is a hard job to do it in this type of situation. So we have the HSPC publishing data on a regular basis. We used to have good stuff from the HSC in terms of close contacts. That stopped in December 24th, so we've been a bit blind on that side.
Do we know why that stopped?
No,
okay.
I don't anyway. Things like traffic data, which we had until the end of this week, it stopped this Monday, and that was a useful indicator. CSO are putting out data on a regular basis, so we do have a lot of things to help, but I suppose what we always need to remember is data tells one story. You also need to talk to people and hear feedback from your frontline workers as to what's really going on. There's no point in having this, like, for example, in some Asian countries, they could track mobile individuals or mobile data. And we do the same here. We don't track the actual individuals. We anonymize them first, and we get that kind of stuff. But you really also need to know what's really going on as well, and no data points or charts will really tell you that. You always need to have that interface with real.
And what kind of things would you be able to include that kind of stuff in your model if you had that information?
Yeah, when you have that type of information, you can get the sense for people, for like especially GPs. So if GPs are raising an early signal, like, oh, we're getting pretty busy, we're getting these extra calls, they might be trying to collect real data, and there's GP Buddy here in Ireland that are doing a really good job. I've heard some people complain about having to go through a GP for testing in Ireland, and it makes sense why it's an issue. And I totally understand why the idea of having testing available on a regular basis, if you can just get a fever, it makes total sense. But there's also, when we're trying to do this living with the virus approach, it helps to have the GPs as an early warning signal, which they are. That they're not used by government, that they weren't using government in December was a different matter, but it was there.
The number of referrals would be one thing, wouldn't it?
The number of referrals, the fact, but even now that they've experienced, they're able to say, well, I think the GPs will be able to go and say, feeling that one might be COVID before the test result comes back. Okay, they might not be right on that individual case, but because of, like, this is experience, you can kind of, if they're reporting it, you get a head start on when the actual test results come back.
There'd be circumstantial evidence, I suppose, that would help GPs as well.
Yeah.
So, this person has a sore throat and we know they're a contact of somebody, and the sore throat happened about 5 days after the contact, that kind of thing. You don't even need the test almost.
Yeah, I mean,
quite confident.
I mean, you've got frontline workers. You have to trust their abilities. We would trust our GPs with everything. We have to trust when they say things are getting bad, they're getting bad. When they say things look like they might be easing, you kind of say, okay, well, that's the time to double down and get rid of it, because that's the easiest time to do it, is when it's suffering.
I do find it a bit depressing, actually, when we think about what a difficult position we're currently in. The numbers, I think we've become a little numb. People are talking about 1,000 cases almost like it's good news. And when we were in December, we were saying, don't let it get to 1,000.
Don't let it get to 400. I mean, that's...
Yeah. But 1,000 was kind of our marker for crisis point. And before this period, we kind of touched 1,000 briefly. For one day, I think wasn't it 1,000 and something small in November maybe, or October was it? But now we've kind of got used to it. It's been hanging around for multiple days, which is a cumulative effect then in the HSE in terms of admissions and all the rest, and the strain it's putting on the system. I think we have to remember that we really need to get those numbers way, way, way down.
Yeah, I mean, there's the knock-on effects that we just, I mean, obviously I hear them here at home as well, like that you've got hospitals full, and you're not going to get services back to normal. You're just not. I mean, that's what I suppose Andrew in the group, his main interest is in getting cancer services back up and running,
Yeah.
and Helen as well. You can't have these services if we have these mad numbers, because we don't know what the risk profile is. We just don't have the staff, and our healthcare workers are going to be exhausted.
Yeah,
I mean, they're going to be a year on their feet at this stage.
I was listening. So Cleana Nikiali, who works in infectious diseases in St. James's Hospital, she was on the Tortoise Shack podcast, and she talked about her worst professional week ever. And in one day, she had to tell 4 different families that there was nothing, that they were going to lose their loved one in one day. 4 different people, 4 different groups. So it's these people have been stretched so thin, and they're going to be so physically and mentally exhausted, and it's not even over yet. It's terrible.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. But,
and you've heard Roisin talk about it as well with Galway, or with different places around the place, where there's a worry that they won't have junior doctors coming into the system because they're just worn out, and they see, I mean, I think New Zealand and Australia are both still looking for public health doctors, and are literally going knock knock, hey Ireland, we'll take your guys.
Yeah. And they can, I mean, because they're very well trained, very competent, and we ought to give them what they need, right? Okay, but today we were going to talk about maybe the numbers and the modelling. Is it a good time now to look at your little presentation, do you think?
Little thing, we'll give it a go.
This is something to explain basically how models work, is it? Or
yeah, it's kind of an introduction to the basics of what models do and definitely do not do. Okay. So models never make, in infectious diseases, they don't make predictions. They look at scenarios. The predictions to predict what the virus will do isn't that difficult. It's really just, you meet a person and there's a chance of you spreading it to them, or you're in a certain situation and there's people around you and there's a chance of giving it to them. But it's the predicting that bit that is impossible, or not impossible, but is really, really, really difficult to do, especially in this. So before the virus came, it was relatively predictable. We meet 14 to 15 on average people per day. Now that could be a long time at home, some of those people. It could be in your workplace. It could also be a 5-minute interaction somewhere, or it could be a quick chat over coffee. All these interactions, and on average, they're very predictable. So in the early stages, like a flu, everything becomes quite predictable and it works through its way. What makes COVID very different is we have to change everything about our lives. So expecting people to know how people are going to behave is impossible. So what you have is a situation where you kind of have to think, well, what might happen? And you base it on very little past information. So for example, NPHET, when they made their recommendations not to reopen restaurants in December, were based on what happened in the summer, where there was a degree of hesitancy in people going back to normality. And had there been that degree of hesitancy, we might just have made it through without it being as bad in January as it has. I too, when I was talking to Rachel Lavin, I said there's going to be some degree of hesitancy that'll cancel out any of the other effects. But there's no, I mean, I don't know. It's just, it was, the people just literally, the government said it was safe to do something, and totally understandable. People do. When you open something, if it's open, it assumes that it's safe.
It's kind of an invitation, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's also, why open the restaurants except if people are to go there? You don't open restaurants to have no customers, that's so.
No, I mean, and this is why I'm very sympathetic to the restaurant owners, because they simply cannot know this. Yeah. They have been fed a lie. You cannot realistically make a restaurant indoors safe enough. I mean, in New York, they closed them. Even when they had, American advice is you wear your mask even inside those restaurants, except when you're putting food in your mouth.
Okay.
I mean, it's
So it's like
it's unrealistic.
Food in.
Yeah, it's just unrealistic. It's just it'd be much better to get it to the community levels to low enough, like we had in the summer. We also in the summer, because everywhere else in Europe had forced it all down together, the amount of imports that were trickling in didn't really hit a critical value till July, and it's really in July when this whole problem burst back again.
Yeah.
But that again, that I remember talking to Yanir to start it may even before ISAG, and I mentioned to him the idea that New Zealand got lucky, but they made their own luck.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if they had been unlucky at the start and then it got into some nursing homes or some hospitals and it managed to last a bit longer, it would have been a harder journey for them. They just acted early, and by acting quickly, you make your own luck. I mean, you can still have bad luck, and their luck has a big role in this. You saw from Sam Scarpino's talk the other day where if you're in a rural community, you can be lucky enough to avoid it, but once it comes in, because you tend to be a closer knit community, it runs through much quicker.
Yeah.
Anyway, so just on to forgetting about the discussion of how simple are these models, and they really are as simple as people, and you kind of what's called compartmentalize. You put them into 3 different categories, and you can do some fancy stuff inside those, but basically people who've never infected, people who are infected. Now, sometimes they'll be not infectious straight away. Sometimes they will have symptoms, sometimes they won't. Sometimes they might be infectious before they have symptoms, just after. And all these things get figured out in over times with experiments and modeling. And then you have a third category, which is removed. So that's when either you recover or you don't at all. Now, when they use the term recover, it just means that you're not dead, and that it's not like you still have all the other possibilities, like
long-term symptoms.
Long-term. It's just you're no longer infectious. Is the simplest.
And the removed ones, do you also consider them maybe protected by immunity as well, or not?
You can. So sometimes you're protected for life. So for example, with measles, with something like COVID or coronavirus. With the other coronaviruses, you'd look at around 46 weeks-ish before you'd look at, it may not get sick, but they might enter the transmission chain so that they could pick it up and give it back on to somebody else. That would be kind of where you're looking. And then, again, depending on what type of disease it is and how it's spread. So these are like ones where it's where there's some form of coming out of your mouth and breathing. So where as opposed
viral shedding, they call it.
Yeah, that way. But then you've any other type of infectious disease is a different mode of contact, let's say. So sometimes you might last in your system for years and years and years, like say HIV, and the amount of contacts you have is much smaller over per day, but the amount of the transmission chance during that contact is higher. But I suppose the main thing is before you have a new disease, you just act the way you've always been acting. And even if you've got something regular like flu, if we have a particularly bad strain, we might take precautions in Europe, whereas in Asia, they're obviously done a much better job over the years, and hopefully that's why they're doing so well now. I mean, practice makes perfect, and I suppose if we don't get good practice this time, we really have to worry about every other time as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is before. Then the next thing is you introduce it into the system, so that can happen. And there's 2 ways. There's most of the first time it's so your animals will transfer it into initial host. So it might be, for example, bats are one of the favorites, but for bats are worry but they're not the big worry. So this is why some diseases can be eradicated if they come from animals, because they're restricted in where they're going to do that. Whereas if you have birds, something can get into the bird population, you're in kind of a more concerning situation because they can fly anywhere. So it's really hard to ever get rid of those. But anything, and so I suppose one of the first questions I had for Jerry Colleen was, is there any chance of this switching over into the longer range species? And he said no. Like, this is just into your bats, your minks, your badgers, the not something to be too much concerned with. Anyway, so he gets in and infects the first local, wherever that locality happens to be. And of course, they may not infect that person. That person may not give it off the first time. You might need to build up a large number of people before it starts to really trigger. It's a bit like trying to light a fire with stones or something, where it just takes enough sparks before you can really get it.
And so when we get an infection like that from some other species, they call it a zoonotic infection. So because it comes from something in zoology. And I remember now at the beginning of SARS-CoV2, when it wasn't even called that, there was a question mark over whether it would be capable of human-to-human transmission, because a virus might be catchable by somebody from, say, a bat or something, but it doesn't mean it's good at transmitting from human to human. And we've kind of got off lucky before with some flus that weren't good at transmitting human to human. And I think they thought that at the beginning, but it turns out this is particularly brilliant at transmission.
Yeah, well, I suppose actually even during this, there was a flu outbreak in China, in animals that they were concerned about would spread. I don't remember the significance, but that if that had spread at the same time, it would have been just yay. Yeah, so it's. I mean, obviously the biological process behind these are more complicated than the maths, and the maths try and simplify it down to something where people who don't understand the biology can try and help the people who understand the biology with the maths elements, and kind of give it an overall sense. And this is why I suppose the good thing about ISAG is because we have all the kind of different backgrounds, trying to work on something as much as we can anyway. So yeah, on day one, this particular person has been infected, but they don't have enough of a viral load in their body to actually shed it to give it to somebody else. And of course, it could be by chance this person might live on their own, and they might be deciding to live on their own, and they get to pass the first 2 or 3 days. They skip out on all of their infectiousness and they don't give it to anybody else. And in countries where you've got a higher portion of people living alone, that's a massive advantage. You don't have to worry about as many chains going on. In countries that are more social, it's an issue. So places like Italy, Ireland, would have
bigger family units,
bigger family units, but also and a bit more additional social interactions than in other, like other countries would have lower in some of those kind of Europe-wide surveys when they try and identify for infectious diseases where to be concerned and where not.
So who would have the advantage? Which countries have the advantage then in terms of generally smaller household sizes? And
the Germany, the Baltic nations, the Nordic nations will be the kind of standout ones that have extraordinary advantage. The ones with the biggest disadvantages would be Ireland, Portugal, Spain, Croatia.
So basically, in some countries, when you're staying at home, you're still with a few other people, a reasonable number of people, and in other countries, staying at home is really much more isolated than in terms of containing the infection. It's much more powerful then.
Yeah, it's kind of like you can switch over to you kind of increase the average transmission inside a country. Now it can be very minor, like overall it can be a small effect, but the small effects when you're talking about these exponential growths where things can go really fast can make a big difference. Mm-hmm. So if someone say 0.95 and 1.05, there's no way of on any instance of telling which one is good, what it really is, but over maybe a period of 2 months, you'll really be able to tell the difference between two numbers that are so close together.
I think that's the thing we've all learned, or we're starting to learn, and through this whole pandemic, is that the cumulative effect of small advantages or disadvantages that are really powerful. There's what seem like incremental differences, they accumulate for the good and for the bad, I suppose, because we eventually, by making sometimes small changes to reduce transmissions, that's powerful. Bigger changes act faster. That's what we'd like. I mean, that's what I'd like. I'd like to have a shorter, stricter lockdown, get it over with, from a general quality of life point of view, but also the number of cases.
Yeah, I suppose on that, like Andy Lavitt, who's now an advisor to President Biden, he kind of has this thing. Well, it was definitely, it was more for the old variants. Nobody has reworked the numbers for the newer variants, but he had this thing that at any point in America they were 4 to 6 weeks away from getting rid of this if they followed these 11 steps. And
is that to say then at any point really anywhere can do it in 4 to 6 weeks? Yeah,
but
I think that's very
which is both
surprising.
good and bad, because even if your numbers are medium range, it's still going to take that amount of time.
I think people will find that very surprising, because I think one of the reasons that people find the idea of lockdown quite depressing, for want of a better word, or just that they don't want to go into it, is because it feels like it'll be forever. And people think like, it's going to take so long. And so, they think I can't go into that level of lockdown for 4 months or 5 months. It's just not tolerable. So I will keep going into the office, and I will keep meeting my friends for a coffee, because they think it isn't just for 6 weeks. They think it's for much longer than that, and therefore they go, okay, look, I can't sustain that, so I won't go that far. I'll do something, but not that far. I think if people felt it was for 6 weeks, I think people could do it, I think. And our schools are going to be closed for another 6 weeks now anyway, right?
Yeah, it's look, it's very hard. Like, we've wasted the last 4 weeks, because this is the issue is, you get to a point where it's either even the tiniest bit is just too much, and you really need to focus all your attention on making sure that that's a manageable small bit. So you're always going to have certain essential services like your hospitals. The great thing is we now have a vaccine that we can get into our healthcare workers that will reduce their risk of bringing it back out into their families to see new houses. So I suppose what I'm looking at on these pictures here is what normality kind of looks like, where all these connections are. This woman who's just been infected meets all these people, her close family over and closer to her, and then someone she works with on the far side of town, and on all these kind of links on a normal level. And on day 1 and on day 2, she's the idea of most of these models, unfortunately, the simple ones from which we see the R's calculated, is it's random. So if it's your same family member,
you keep going. I'm just getting a power plug.
If it's the same family member, or if it's a total stranger, they're treated equally in the standard models, and that is actually totally fine for something like flu or things where you have background and you haven't really changed your social circumstances. So we've this level of mixing where the average is okay. But so, for example, here on day 3 now, she's not infectious, she's not symptomatic yet, but she's just started to be infectious. She's infected somebody she works with, and then on the next day she's infected a close friend, and she still meets people, because nobody's aware yet at this stage of the virus. And this was a real problem when shot with in Wuhan, was it's just a cold, for so many people. So they ended up just acting normally and spreading it, going to working when they have symptoms, all these things. So they end up for a long period of time spreading it to loads of people. On day 5, this person gets a temperature, some symptoms, maybe, we'll exaggerate here, we won't use real time scales, and they just cut down. They meet their friend on that day, they had it, and they're still just at home. Day 6, no real changes, because over here our other person isn't infectious yet. It's infected. Now she's infected the two people she's living with. Now this person has infected someone that she recognizes as a close contact, and also somebody that she may just have passed by on the street, in a shop, in a closed environment, something like that. And then they picked up. So that's one of your unknowns. This is one of your mystery cases. That's a real mystery that ideally you'd be able to hunt down. But these are not scary cases as well. But they'll happen. But if you can control the rest of the numbers, you can get and make sure that this person you do the contact tracing on, and you get all their forward contacts. Whereas on the other people over here, so this person here, you'd like to, if they show up with symptoms, you have to do backward tracing on them, so that you could protect the future contacts of these people by quarantine. We won't get into the quarantine isolation thing. Day 9, we go on. And then by day 10, public health, find, track, trace, isolate, and support those people so that, yes, it has spread a bit, but now you're able to make an intervention and keep it so that it doesn't spread anymore by allowing those full investigations back along the way. Your first person now has been removed. They've got past all their illness, and they're no longer anything to worry about. Now, day 24, everybody has cleared up in this example, or is contained, so you don't need to overly worry about them.
So we're imagining then that it because public health intervened, that it didn't spread any further. Then all the blue people there have been protected by public
all those blue people they're still susceptible. They could still be infected if there was people going around, but they can now go back to more of a normal life, and without worrying. And some of the people who have been released from the quarantine can interact with them as well. And we see, I think, in Australia or New Zealand, where I think it's New Zealand, where now they're trying to keep an eye on people. After they leave the quarantine, they track all of their own movements in case they're one of the 2% that takes longer than 14 days. Yeah. And then they can act on that in a measured way.
That's really good.
Yeah. So then day 30, we've well, this is a community, let's say, so it's still in the country, but likewise, if you zoom this up to the whole country and you allow these things to be re-imported, it's for public health. It's just a whole start over again job, because there's no way of tracking this person back. If they're from there, they may have been from here, went on holidays, come back, then there's so many possibilities, and you're crossing things where you're not able to do the full track. You don't necessarily know the person, and you get the same situation again. Sometimes this maybe person has meets somebody who's already infected first time around in a small community. They can't pass it back on to them. That they've, at least for 30 days, they've got full immunity. They don't in every situation. But there's still this whole other community who can expose. Then we go 31. They might just infect one person. The other person who they were close to for the whole day, they don't have to worry about giving it on to them. They're already protected from the past exposure. And then we'll go up a little while, we'll zoom up and pretend we're really good and we're able to get a vaccine within 60 days.
By day 60, brilliant.
Yeah, they're great. Well, then, to be honest, what they did was even better. I was definitely not expecting, because I got really, in June, we abandoned our office. We said, okay, we'll all work from home, and just leave it like that for a while, because we just didn't see, once we heard that the government weren't going to close the airports or put in quarantine at that time, we just thought, there's no point. We're in this for the long haul, so we made adjustments, and we didn't expect from people were talking to that there would be any vaccine that will be very successful within the time frame that has happened. But it has, and that's great. Even if we will have a few more battles probably down the line, but that's still a whole lot better than we were expecting this time last year. So we get a reimportation from a person who's been vaccinated in a different country, who are now allowing back in because that country has managed to fully vaccinate their thing. But when we looked at the vaccination, it stops 100% hospitalization, so 100% severe disease. That country is perfectly safe in itself, but the drop in transmission is only 2/3. So great, okay, they come in, there's a reduced chance of them giving them on. So this occasion, the person doesn't do anything, but on the next time, and another person comes in, there's still that chance of them transmitting on. When we have our own population highly vaccinated, this is fine. This is the same as every other problem. We're not there, and we're not getting there anytime soon.
So somebody traveling who is vaccinated can still carry and transmit the virus. And if they're traveling out to or back to a place where people are not significantly vaccinated, they can set everything off again.
They can, yeah. I mean, they won't be like
they won't be ill themselves.
They won't be ill themselves, which of course might be a problem, because then they might just get through. They'll have their vaccine cert, if that's what becomes required, and they won't have symptoms, or they might have very mild symptoms. In which case, well, I have my vaccine, and then they give it off to maybe not as many people because they've reduced viral loads, but it might be just 1 or 2 people they meet instead of the 6.
Yeah.
So but either which way, it starts a chain.
Yeah.
Again.
And I suppose one of the things about people who are traveling is they are probably traveling to visit places and see people and do things. So they are more likely to be moving around and seeing different people every day and that kind of thing. So
yeah, well, we saw on the flight that the Irish health workers were able to, public health workers were able to analyze where and how many regions had to cooperate to track that.
Yeah. That was a really good piece of detective work, really. And it shows, I think, what the public health doctors are capable of when they're not overwhelmed by huge case numbers. Like they can really do that backwards tracing. They can say where everybody caught it, where they ended up. And I think that's really powerful as well, not only in tracing those cases, but also in understanding what we need to do to protect ourselves. Because so long as nobody's managed to trace cases on a plane, for example, people might think that might mean transmission doesn't occur on a plane, rather than we were too overwhelmed to do the tracing.
Yeah, and, and I suppose that's what we hear. We hear is the issue, and it makes total sense. Like if you get 3 student queries in a day, you'd be fine. If you got 300 student queries in a day, suddenly you're the worst lecturer possible.
Suddenly they'd be getting a blanket response. I'd be redirecting them to a web page. Read it; it's all in there somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, and it's the same with anybody. Once you put, but I suppose especially with this problem because it's so critical. So they can probably manage a certain amount, and it's a case of focusing resources where you think those weaknesses are, but you don't want to leave yourself with too many weaknesses. So at the moment, we're leaving ourselves wide open in 2 fronts. One, which will be a challenging thing to sort, which is our intergrouping but on the island. So I don't just mean the Northern Ireland's political entity. I mean the fact that there's a zone of interaction in a number of areas that can be isolated from each other. But if it gets into one area, you have to make sure that you properly close down that area. So we had the bang middle in the Kildare lockdown, but that made no sense because it made sense to do it, but it made no sense the way it was done because we were allowed to commute into Dublin. So suddenly you're going to get somebody who has it who's going to bring it into Dublin, and then suddenly it's in Dublin, and then there's people traveling from Dublin down to Cork, and then suddenly it's in Cork. But it's not like this earlier on. It's not everybody who carries it. You don't have to catch everything. You just have to make sure it's a manageable workload, that you're not shoving on an exponential amount of work on somebody. Like, oh, you didn't answer that email, so I'll give you 2. Oh, you didn't answer those 3, I'll give you 6.
And now it's 100.
And now, and it's just becomes very unmanageable. Whereas if you give people a pace that they can handle, and it's a case of working out what that pace is. And they seem to suggest it's 5 in the day. I think that's ambitious, but I think in when the modelers in Victoria went and told what's his name, Sutton?
Yeah, Brett Sutton.
The values that they need to be looking at, it was 5 for their population of 5 million, so per day. And if you got to that, they were sure, well, we definitely should be able to last until Christmas in the models. But the model's really hard to account the amount of capability that public health workers have. So clearly they were able to manage much better than the models gave them credit for. So once they were able to get those cases down low, know where they were able to do a much better job than the models predicted. But at the same time, when they did the initial run and said maybe we could do it at 25, it just looked like no, they were going to wreck their own Christmas, and they decided no, we were better off to push that extra bit and make sure that our people can get safer for longer, because it might only that extra week spent getting it down that bit more could save them 2 to 3 months on the other end, and that's the time that you save to get everybody vaccinated, all the things down the line. That it's just a time buying exercise until the troops can come in.
And it's the comfort that we can live in compared to constant lockdown. Okay, I should let you keep talking about your slides.
Yeah, sorry, don't worry about these. They're literally copied. They're not a simulation. They're just a diagram of what type of things you have to do in them. So you have here again, yeah, so the very first person here, I didn't show them that. So here on day 31, they were grand. Then by day 60, just this person happens, their immunity faded away. So there will always be a certain percentage. We've already seen, I think there's been at least 3 to 4 confirmed reinfection deaths in the Western world. We have no idea what's going on in Manaus and in South Africa. Manaus is a very, I suppose,
I thought
scary
in
story.
Manaus there were a lot of people being infected for the second time. Is that not known, or is that just presumed?
Presumed, because they don't have to show a reinfection, you have to confirm it with genetic tests.
Okay.
That they're both times, and so that's why it's very hard to confirm a Oh, sorry, I don't know that. I've been told that's why it's very hard to confirm a reinfection.
It's resource intensive.
Resource intensive. There's very few countries doing it. Like there was one guy caught in Hong Kong airport. It was one of the first earlier on ones where he was caught asymptomatic the second time, which is what you kind of would hope for.
So, yeah, at least it's somewhat protected.
Yeah, but then when the stats came in a little bit later, it's biased as well, because now it's people who are sick who are getting tested second time. So yeah, we don't know with reinfection what's the actual going to look like, and what percentage of people are liable. Yeah, so you end up the same unfortunate person getting infected again. One of the vaccinated people get infected, but again, they might be just like this person. They might not have as much force in the transmission that they give it onto, so they might not get sick, and they might just end up giving it to less people, and that we can cope with, because that will bring down. See, we can live in a more free society, even with a certain fraction. The problem is that fraction, and what we might expect it to be is crazy. It's like 90. With say with the
90% what vaccinated, certain fraction vaccinated.
Yeah, so there's AstraZeneca one, they're talking about a 2/3 drop in transmission. For winter times, we could look by next winter, we might need to have well over 90% of the population vaccinated.
And this is the entire population. This is not just adults.
Oh, this is the entire population. But children, that Dr. Fauci had something saying he expected in the summer, and every time he's made something prediction, and he's been kind of very, very close to truth. So,
right. Do you know what I heard? A nickname for the vaccine that somebody in the US came up with, the Fauci ouchie. Thought it was brilliant. Have you got your Fauci ouchie yet?
He's definitely he's in the best position to know, and now he's able to say things more. So
yeah, what a difference.
Yeah. I remember seeing his first interview afterwards, and you could just see, I'd never seen somebody look so happy.
Yeah, you could actually see the load lifting off his shoulders.
Yeah. So anyway, this is, and the issue with COVID is it's, and especially with the newer variants, it's not that the vaccines won't work. They really hope it should for stopping people getting sick and all these things that would know nothing about myself. It's just based on what other people, as you know, feed in, and that would be great. But you have to still worry about everybody else who doesn't have it. Remembering that our last March was from about less than 3% of our population being infected, even to date. And the problem back then was it was fairly well spread among all the age groups. Mm-hmm. Over the summer to winter, it was mainly a younger cohort. And now it's still mainly younger people. So there's still a percentage of our older population who are in line, who need to be vaccinated as soon as we can.
Because they're very vulnerable, because
and because, I mean, the thing is, it's not like it's really super targeted at them. Over a certain age, it pretty much is doubling your chance of dying compared to anything else. It's like, I think if you're 48-year-olds, it doubles your chances of dying in that year if you catch it compared to everything else.
Okay.
So it's still pretty bad no matter what age you are. It's just because you're less likely to die, and there we're not seeing as much. But if you let it rip through the whole population, that's a totally different thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's awful. Do you have any more slides on this?
I have
Yeah.
just a boring one on why NEFIT are never going to see us getting to zero. Is
Why
because
they think it won't happen.
Well, why it can't happen with them. With their models, it's just not possible.
Oh, I see. Under the way they model it, it never happens.
It can never happen because they allow for this mixing is between random people.
Okay.
But if you control that to just be in your house, there's less people. And pretend that your houses are instead of people being infected, pretend it's households that are infected. So now it's the case of how many households do your houses make connections with?
Okay.
And that changes how you view the problem altogether. So it's how many connections there are between houses and how strong those connections are. Now, what happened in Wuhan is they were able to cut down to zero because they were very, very, very strict. But it also didn't take them that long. The date that they predicted, the date that Wuhan will reopen was the date to the day that the predictions would be that they'd be at zero.
Oh wow! So it was 100% adherence.
It was 100. Well, they were in a very lucky position, and again, we can't just copy them for never mind civil rights reasons. Just it's the practicalities. They were able to bring in the doctors from other parts of the country.
Yeah.
So they didn't have to worry about that. It's not to say you can't learn, like other countries did the same thing. We ourselves, we did this. We've already got ourselves to nothing as far as community transfer is gone. Tony Ullin back in May said there was community transmission was essentially gone.
This actually makes me mad when I think about it, though, because it was such a wasted opportunity. So like the people did everything the people could have done. There's nothing left for them to do. They cut all their contacts and they got the transmission down to zero. And then what we did was we just said, okay, let's pretend it's February again. Let's start all over again. We'll just let it in and let it.
Yeah, and like I said, we were able to manage for quite some while because, well, two reasons. One was when it wasn't re-imported. So we had the Sligo example where it came in from the north and into Sligo, and they were able to, public health doctors were able to get on top of it, fully investigate it and swamp it out. And that's exactly what their job is. That's what they know how to do that. They're the people we don't hear about. We've maths people, data people who know very little on their own unless they're being fed all the lines. We have, not enough. We don't hear from the people who actually know. Now we don't hear from them because they're very busy, but we don't even hear from on the committees. It's there's academics. There's not the people who are doing this, who've done this before, who know how to do this. And this is why I suppose I said one with Jerry Flynn, who's been on the front lines in Tanzania, all over the place with every possible combination of virus, who's done this, who when he said whenever I contacted him first, when I saw made some maths mistake in one of his things and I corrected him on it, which was a bit cheeky, but yeah.
That's the start of a beautiful friendship.
But when he said that his blood ran cold when he saw this, when you think about what he deals with, what he's dealt with, malaria, when he thought, his initial reaction was, sure, Europe will be able to deal with this. More concerned probably with America, but when Europe just totally went into denial, and that means, of course, the thing is, when we're like this, we can't help the other nations that we should be in a position to do. Now
tell me what it is. So you're saying the way NEFIT models,
so
they're modeling everybody as an individual, and they're forgetting that people live in households.
Yeah, they don't in the model was just published back in May. So people have been called from to publish their models. They have. I mean, they did back in May. Reviewed it. It's the same as the common ones that have been used for flu. They broke down those infectious into the different parts. So exposed, infectious, symptomatic, pre-symptomatic, all the things that, it makes sense and it's perfectly valid for a flu, but it doesn't take into account what happens in a strict lockdown. So instead of where you have people where you can mix with loads of people, or even the fact that you can mix with just 3 people, but those 3 people aren't necessarily the same 3 people all the time. But once you have that, the only people you can ever really infect are the ones who you are interacting with. So if you have with B117, if we get to 3 contacts on average, which we're below at the moment, if we get up to 3, and if they are random enough, which they might end up being, then it can hit the whole, nearly the whole population.
So sorry, say that again. With the B117, because it is more infectious.
Yeah.
If people have 3 random contacts, as opposed to the 3 people I live with, and they're the same contacts every day, and they'll be the same contacts next week, and we are effectively a bubble, right? So, but 3 random contacts, so it's different people, different days.
Yeah, you kind of
117, it goes through the whole population, and there's no stopping it.
Yeah, whereas with the previous one, it would have been 4, which is
Okay.
it doesn't sound like a big difference, but it's still it meant you'd some leeway with the previous variants. With this one, you just don't. There's very little leeway at all. We still see this in Denmark, where they have a lockdown of sorts, but they're allowing groups of 5 to meet, and they're wondering why B117 is going up, and the other ones are all going down. And that's
yeah. Okay, so they're giving it the space it needs to grow.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be that well random. It just has enough that you can link all the different networks of people together. But if you have a proper lockdown where you kind of really control who you're meeting or where you're meeting, now this might have to look at things like how regularly you go to your shopping, in person. But you can then, whoever's been exposed at the start of this period, which we're not in, by the way, unfortunately, whoever's exposed at that start, it's only the amount of contacts on average times that will be exposed at the end. So that gives you a total number. That's not the entire population. In fact, it's not even that high percentage of the entire population.
I'll say this again. So we're not in a proper strict lockdown at the moment. We see that in a few ways because people are going into offices and we see the traffic and everything. But if tomorrow morning, we suddenly went into the proper strict lockdown where people really didn't go out unless they had to. They minimize their numbers of trips to the shops. They don't meet people for coffee, and they're not going into the office. Yep. We are starting with a caseload of around about 1,000 per day. That's kind of what we're at the moment for the last little while. So you're saying starting from there, then what happens?
Well, okay, it's 1,000 per day, but then you have to go back for maybe 7 days. So say 7,000. You're probably also not catching everybody who really has it. So you might multiply it by 3.
Okay.
Give the amount. So you might have 21,000. Okay.
So we think we probably have 21,000 people who are currently infected and infectious.
Infected or exposed. So who will become infectious.
Okay.
So that might be.
So some of them are already infectious.
Yeah, some are already infectious. I mean, the thing with the case numbers is, but when they're announced, those people, a good chunk of them, are no longer infectious, because by the time the test result comes and they've actually went to it and all that, or not long left on. But so you might have some 21,000 to 30,000, but then you have an average household size of around 3, so that's 2.7. But a lot of those people will be of those infected people might be in crowded housing conditions, so that they'll have a larger cohort. So you end up being able to infect that amount. Now that's, I suppose, in a situation where we actually allow that to happen. But if we have crowded housing situations, the idea you hear from Andrew of supported isolation, where you're able to extract everybody in that house into a separate supported isolation situation, or where you don't have to worry about that spread being as rapid. So you can really, those type of methods, and testing those people in those environments to make sure that it keeps it low. Even things like masking in those air masks that Ian talks about.
Oh yeah,
reduce that in-house.
HEPA filter, is it, or something like that? The name?
I don't.
Yeah, something like that. It's the one where it's actually filtering the air
into you, and it's easier.
It's little
for kids because it's not really having the same effect. So anyway, that's the thing. I suppose that like I said, we don't test children as much here as we probably should be, or it's not very pleasant, so I don't blame anybody. But you have to remember that as well. It may not be, it really could be 2 or 3 completely asymptomatic people in those houses as well who are able to spread that.
Okay, so Neffett's model presumes that mixing keeps happening even in lockdown. So they think of people mixing with on average 3 at all times.
Well, I think that they don't use, so Neffett, as far as I can tell, they tend to use they forget about the number of people you meet, and they just put in an this R value, this that we hear in the news. They put that straight in without necessarily going back to seeing how do you get to it.
Okay.
And once you just do with that, then you end up with a situation where it's just always going to be either exponentially growing to some degree or exponentially decreasing. But exponentially decreasing, it takes a long time to exponentially decrease, because you're always, you say, if it's 0.5, you're always halving.
Yeah.
It's a very
like the half-life of radioactive material.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Whereas if you try and look at in more of a step kind of way, saying, well, it's 14 days, that's as long as it's going to be, and you've got 14 days and you've got 3 people in your house. So it's 14 plus 14 plus 14. And if you were to do it that way, you get slight differences, very little differences when you're mixing. Like I said, when you're doing all the mixing stuff, because it might be only you, and then you pass it on to someone in a different house, and it starts again. And that the well mixing model is fine, even with the kind of levels we're at right now, where as we can see with the traffic levels, we know, everybody knows that there's offices open, there's factories open that weren't open in April. Basically, there's so much open now that wasn't open in April. Even things like takeaway coffees, takeaways, those type of
things. And people meet outside those. They wait for their coffee as well. They're hopefully open in the open air, which reduces the chances, but still it's not great. But so now NEFIT's model then. So NEFIT model, they just put in the R value. They're not thinking about the fact that people are in lockdown. If we do it right, which we're not doing right now, but we'd like to do it right, in lockdown, people are really only
most of us are doing it right. That's a sickening thing. If you look at
a lot of us are. Yes,
and it's not even that people aren't doing it right. It's that they're being told
not permitted to.
They're not. They have to go. They've been told that they have to go to work. We even know in public sector jobs where they could be working from home, that they're being brought into their offices. So it's not like it's some private, evil thing. It's everywhere.
And I know examples. I know somebody who is a solicitor, and she told me everybody in her firm except her is going in and working in the office, not even wearing masks. I know somebody else who is an accountant for a bookshop, and the bookshop's doing all their sales online and everything like that, but they insist that to do the accounts, she has to go in rather than do them from home, which seems like it's a desk job, and it's not even customer facing. It's
it's the same. The hospitals are the same as well. They have HR functions in. There's crazy stuff going on.
So there's more we could be doing. But
it's only really needs government to do that. You can't expect.
Yes, that's what I mean. I meant we by the country. Yeah, definitely. The people, I think, are doing everything they can. But so NEFIT's model is just not. It's never going to see a path to zero, because they're not thinking about how the lockdown can contain things to households.
Yeah, and there's a few issues. There's also the issue with, so yes, that's one reason why it's never going to. They also, even like the other models, they don't take into account the work that public health can do at the low numbers. So it's always a case of it gets down and then something happens and it goes straight back up.
What they did in Sligo that you were talking about.
Yeah, those examples, or the airplane, or even what they did in Kildare, where it was able to, really not lock it down inside there, but there was leakage into Dublin because Dublin wasn't in the same position, or because we were allowed into Dublin. Those type of things. But it's models only give you as much as you're willing to them to do. You also have to kind of sit back and think, well, what makes most sense? And if you listen to your public health doctors, who are the people who've led these outbreak controls, they're telling us what to do. And models really should be there to kind of just either support or question them. But the people with experience, like I've done modeling in so many different situations and applications, and the one thing you'll never beat is the people who actually have done the job before. Models generally, more often than not, will support them, or might highlight some small issues with where they could help them, or might speed up a process when they're designing something. But it rarely contradicts what the people on the ground, as public health doctors, are saying needs to happen.
Yeah.
Or whatever the situation is.
Yeah. So, okay. Oh, here you got something.
So here's some examples, some clear examples. Now, like I said, the traffic data has stopped since this week. So Like it was
For reasons we don't know.
well, I mean,
When did
it
it
has
start?
stopped before. It stopped in 2019 for 1 month, but other than that, it's been going since 2013. But
Okay.
you know, getting stuff up can be an issue. It's just really bad timing. But so, for example, just taking the north to south situation for kind of estimating what kind of workload we have to see. So it obviously will depend on what's going on in the north case wise.
So where's Jonesboro? Is that where you have a little that little
Jonesboro
black?
is here. Jonesboro is the crossing. So you're a Dub, are you?
I am, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So you've never been outside the county boundaries. That's why you don't have to worry about Dubs, because I still remember a friend of mine from college who didn't know which one was Houston or which one was Conley. So it's up there at the border crossing.
Okay.
And so yeah, that's where you kind of be able to look at the traffic coming north and
Okay.
south. And so you can see last year, or so it started January last year, before there was anything other than a few rumors of something from Wuhan, and we're in this kind of situation. And then this year we're doing well. We're half that, but it's nothing like
It
April.
was in
You
April.
also might notice that if you look at the non-vehicle traffic, it's still at a sustainable level now. There's not a whole lot of difference between
So
any
that
of these.
when you say other, that's lorries and stuff.
Lorries, it actually does include buses and motorcycles and
Okay.
things like that, but you can break it down into each of the different components. But this is the kind of trying to see how much work do we have to do on monitoring? How many people would have to have rapid test assessments on a daily basis? Kind of the checks. Who would have to kind of really travel, and how far would they have to travel? You know, when Julian was talking to the Australians, how much work is not on people but on governments, organizations, to make sure they can manage and know where everything is happening. It doesn't have to be it's not superseding any of these points. It's about knowing what's happening so that you can track and trace them, so that if there is an outbreak, you can trust your public health team to do what they've done before, what they're trained to do, and hunt them down, and they fully know where to track back up along the lines. And especially when you're talking about truckers like the guys next door, they know, they're used to regulations, they're used to tracking, they're used to everything. They deal with so much paperwork and nonsense. Looks like nonsense. They're used to these type of things. The extra work, and especially when you consider for their own families, that we'd be the testing we'd be kind of carrying out on them on a regular basis as those type of essential workers would be some reassurance, so that they'd know when they're going back home that they haven't brought this back into their own family.
Mhm.
And like I said, so both on a Tuesday and on a Saturday, when the data was available, you can see the levels of activity on a Saturday in this January have just been too high. But they've also been consistent. There hasn't been any signs of fatigue. So it's since the start of January till now, until the stuff stopped working, the levels were very constant. We've seen the same with Google mobility charts. We've seen pretty much the same with when the CSO were published the stuff on mobile.
So yeah, this graph here. So this is what you call staying local indicator, SLI, up the y-axis. So the higher the value, the more people have stayed close to home.
Yeah.
So here for lockdown, the higher the better.
Yeah. So this is not really a great measure, because it's basically 10 kilometers no matter where you are. 10 kilometers in Dublin and 10 kilometers in Mayo are
different
two completely different things, but the patterns are identical, so that you can kind of see, like, I can't stay in 5 kilometers here to get to a shop. So in Mayo, in some parts, it'll be even longer for some people to get to a decent shop.
It's actually very striking how the patterns are just the 3 lines, and the dark blue is Dublin and the green is Mayo, and they go up and down together totally.
They're totally in sync. Behaviors are in sync because the national patterns have been in sync.
Yeah.
Now, if you were to look at Kildare, during their kind of lockdown, where it was just Kildare, that is different, but it's the only.
Okay. Yeah. The only time you'd see.
So when you do localized things, you get localized effects, but in general, we're not doing localized.
But so what we see here in this graph then is in March, April.
What you can see exactly in this graph is, you see in this part here in August, when we had Dublin under a slightly different conditions than the rest of the country, they didn't have the same drop that say Mayo and the rest had. It's just
Oh, yeah, slightly regionalized.
Yeah,
But
there
the
is
thing
slightly.
that the high point on the graph happens, no matter where you are, it happens in April.
Yeah,
basically.
In a few days in April.
Yeah, and we are not at that now. So we are currently, well, at least up to the last data you have there, we are, that's what you're pointing at there with those two horizontal red lines.
Yeah,
it's the difference between what we have done in the past and what we're doing now in terms of staying local. And we were better at staying local last April than now.
Yeah, and I mean, especially this is Dublin driven. So if you, I mean, places like Mayo, other places in the country may be staying closer to April, but in Dublin there's definitely more movement in Dublin.
Yeah.
Dublin is the biggest driver here of cases once it gets.
Yeah, I see that the gap. So if you look at the green line, the high point in the green line in April, it's basically on that 60% line. And we can see now the high point recently
55.
is just a bit below that, but not as big a gap as there is in the Dublin. Yeah.
Okay, and we could still like the old strain is dying out in these scenarios anyway, because we have things that we didn't have in April. So we have a larger portion of the population already built this immunity, so they're blocked from transmitting on. So instead of it being virtually nobody, we have maybe 10%.
Is it 10% of the people in the country?
It's guesswork. Maybe 12%. So again, guesswork. If it's 15-ish% in Northern Ireland. So, but you have to look in local things. Yeah, so there's a lot more to being done, I suppose, to keep Dublin more closed in for itself's sake. I suppose how we look at these zones and why it's important is, if you look where you can realistically contain the virus, and it's not trivial, because it's, with one exception, it doesn't follow county boundaries. The only kind of one that relatively people stay within their own county and in general basis is Galway.
I was going to say Cork. I was like, if I had to guess, I'd say Cork.
Yeah, well, Cork too, but that's for different reasons.
Cork people don't
Cork spreads a little. I won't say too much, but Cork spends a little bit into Kerry and Kerry into Cork.
Oh,
that might not be too
controversial statement.
Yeah. But yeah, there's, and I suppose when I've seen other charts that I can't show, but they where Cork, Limerick, and Kerry are a bit more interconnected than this, but that's it. Like they don't.
So on this map of Ireland here on the left, you are showing a single color. A single color means people who have like similar movement patterns.
Similar movement patterns. So they would be.
So all the blues are moving in the same piece of Ireland, and all the purples are moving in the same piece of Ireland, and all the reds are moving in the same piece of Ireland.
Yeah.
So we can see that's what you're saying. The Cork and Kerry are pretty much their
own little bubble.
Yeah. And then Limerick, there's a big bubble around Limerick. Galway, there's a big bubble around Galway. Is that Athlone there in brown?
That's Athlone, which covers a few counties, and then you've got some towns that are more difficult. So Ballinasloe is about the only one outside of the Dublin region. Donegal town really might be to do here, and very little to do with north of Donegal.
The Letterkenny kind of area.
Yeah, it's more so Letterkenny area here. You can see is more closely aligned with Northern Ireland. Dundalk here and here is its own little zone to a large degree.
And then of course Dublin is the tricky one.
Dublin is the tricky one.
So we got the yellow, which is mostly within the county,
Dublin,
and then the green is
yellow. I think is Swords. I think it's kind
yellow is Swords, is it? Yeah. Swords gets something all to itself.
Yeah. I think it's more like the airport.
Okay.
I think that general area. But that's.
And then the green, of course, we see that it's going. You can see the kind of the tentacles spreading out around the country. But these are people who are then commuting into Dublin, essentially.
Yeah, and there are, it would take logistical planning to figure out this properly. But remember, this is from a previous census before working from home was an issue, so that would change it. So we'd have to the analysis would have to be redone to take into account that if you
So,
were trying to think
so
of,
some of those long extended connections
yeah,
might actually already be broken now. So things might be a lot more compact already by the working from home thing.
yeah, there might be a higher degree of compactness if I'm working from home, or the threats of, say, here, Meath down to Wexford might not be as direct as they were in pre-times. And yeah, there are, so for example, if we were to look here, if this was, say, you were worried about just monitoring flu or something, you'd more look along these type of lines. Some of them are across county, so north and south tip have to split again. They won't have any problems with that. But there's other places that, like Galway has to claim a tiny bit of Mayo, won't go down too well. And there's these just zones that make more sense from how people work and live than
And
what we
what you're
might
talking
like.
about here is if you were to have, like, say, if you needed to have a localized lockdown, like the Laois Offaly Kildare one,
Yeah,
you wouldn't be talking about Laois Offaly Kildare. You would be talking about counties. You'd be talking about something that reflects the way people actually move.
exactly. And you'd have to try to enforce that so that you don't inconvenience them, but you also don't put all the rest of your county at a disadvantage. So people in Offaly rightly did not like the idea of the Offaly being included in that LOK down, because they were as far away from, like, it was Eden Derry, which is right here.
Okay.
It's literally closer to Dublin than it is to some parts of Offaly.
Yeah.
And it's still the cover zone. So I don't actually have a map on this, but see if I can drag one up later. You can see the zone around here, Naas, Newbridge, Portlaoise, and Eden Derry covered this zone, but it also ended up covering parts of Wicklow and Meath and Dublin, but it didn't cover parts of Laois or Offaly at all. Covered tiny bit, maybe into Kenny, but at the same time, that's just on a map, lines on a map, versus what you can see here. There's very little traffic going that in orange in this zone. So this is not perfect. There will be some people who will be deeply inconvenienced, but it'll be a small percentage of people, and then you have to make sure those people get supported. If it's a case of we get down, we have to do a regional lockdown again. We have to think of it either. I mean, if you want to say, oh, lockdown Kildare, then you actually have to make sure that they're not going into Dublin. Otherwise, it's just going to contaminate the whole zone.
Yeah.
And if, for example, it gets down to Wexford and you haven't put in a barrier for it to go to Waterford, you've got a barrier flowing this way.
But these things, this is what we're trying to do if we have parts of the country that are worse than others. But at the moment, everywhere is kind of rubbish, isn't it?
It is, but if you want to do any system, it's best to put it in place when failure of the system is of least consequence.
Yeah.
So
that you get all the teething problems.
They get the teethings, but also it will accelerate the reduction in the individual areas.
Okay.
So because if you have any kind of cross importations, you end up reseeding a new chain. So it's not just a continuous; it's an entire chain every time that goes on and on and on. So the smallest little things that you add in just make it harder for that community to get to extinguish those chains.
Yeah. So what are you showing there as well in Donegal?
And so here's the difficult boys, the ones that people keep asking about. Oh, what about the border? And I'm definitely diverging from the rest of ISAG on this, on it having to be a bit more rigorous and having proper testing localized to what will be about 25,000 people in this type of area, and putting checks and testing, making ready available in these areas, so that if there's an unconcerned, we can't manage, we can't do anything about Derry. Of course, they will hopefully do something themselves, and of course they are way ahead on vaccination as well. So the chances of them transmitting it when there's an interaction is going to be reduced, but not zero, which means all that means is it'll become more manageable.
Yeah.
So instead of the moment where there's probably about one importation from here to here a day, with the reduction in total case numbers in Northern Ireland and the reduction in transmission from people in those areas, the amount could reduce down to a level which is much more manageable, even without any particularly strict enforcement in this area. But you'd still like to have, testing, regular testing in some of these areas if you're really trying to protect it. I mean, people keep going about Northern Donegal has been some issue with the border. For me, the single biggest problem for trying to keep this back out of Dublin on a long-term basis is this RD area here. It's a population where they work both go north and south, so that's the area that would be kind of like the pinch point for protecting Dublin. There's no, in the rest of the country, there's actually very few pinch points. The rest of the country could be separated, got to zero locally. Hopefully the other cohort get to zero, as long as you kind of can prevent it from being reintroduced. Yeah. I suppose the other thing is, what can models do? Well, one thing we were missing was when we stopped testing. So when we stopped testing in April, it's trying to fill in those gaps. Sorry, March. So
when we stopped testing, what?
When we stopped testing, or when we restricted testing back in March last year. So on March 23rd, we restricted testing to 2 symptoms and really on elderly people or people or healthcare workers. And that meant we missed an absolute load of cases. That would have been cases according to the definition of what a case was before that. But I didn't do anything special. I stuck in the same values from transmission that Wuhan papers said, and this is what you get.
So this is the paper that was written in Wuhan. They modeled.
This is why they decided that lockdown was the only option.
Okay.
They simply put it in and they said the only way we can get control of this is by cutting our. They didn't do the household thing. They just said we've cut our contacts down to be just 3, and then we can get out of here.
So they did that based on the infectiousness.
Based on how much a person transmitted to each other, which is around 5%, that they would be transmitting for around 7 days, and that they were really doing 2 parameters needed. And so initially that was 15 people that you'd be meeting, and then that it's 3 when they put in these restrictions. And when they did that, their model wasn't as strict as what happened in Wuhan. Wuhan went quicker than their model. And then when that happened, I was like scratching my head, figuring out how did that happen? The curve was too rapid of a decline. And then came up with this thing, well, the household thing. And
it's because they weren't 3 random contacts.
They weren't 3 random. They were
same
3
ones every day, and they weren't seeing anybody else.
So it died off. So the first 3 to 4 weeks, not much of a difference. But after that, it dies off really, really quickly. Same thing happened in New Zealand when their first few cases came in. They acted really early, and they had the same pattern. Same thing happened in Austria. Same thing actually happened in Ireland as well. So we were delayed. We shouldn't, this was the case of when we stopped testing on the 23rd, we should have just, once you were blind, you shouldn't be driving. We should have locked down as soon as we couldn't see what was going on. And there's so many lives lost from that poor decision back then. And
so on this graph, you've got purple lines and red lines.
Purple
so
lines
red lines are the ones we actually counted.
Yep.
And purple lines are what you think was really there, that because we didn't see them because we weren't testing properly.
Yeah. And when I did this, I got about 100,000 people actually infected around, give or take, which when they did in June and July, when they did the serological tests, it was in and around the same percentage as that. Similarly, when we did the same thing, so I did it for New Zealand, Austria, Sweden, Ireland, because I wasn't sold on the idea of lockdown from the beginning, just didn't like it, and knew it was going to be harmful from business. Didn't like the idea. I liked Israel had an idea floating around of doing a rolling on-off lockdown. I thought, oh, that might be sustainable. 1 week on, 1 week off. Yeah, that wouldn't be pleasant.
Easier to live with or something.
You could live with it. And then it eventually became obvious that there's too many other stuff going on. It's not, these models are too simplistic to actually do that in practice. But yeah, so I went through all the possibilities to see what could work out. And yeah, the only ones that looked like they were cheery was Ireland, Austria initially, and New Zealand. Wuhan was caught by surprise, obviously. And they had this massive shoot up, worse than ours, and they just controlled it. So did we in April.
Yeah.
And we could again. It's harder. It's harder by B117. That's what they call the proper name for the UK variant. Shouldn't do that. But because we have a certain portion already immune from being previously infected, that reduces a little bit that effect. So we're kind of back to where we were a little bit. We are able to control this if we choose to, or not. If it's not us. It's up to the government to make sure the rest of us are able to or willing to, and also to give us hope that, like, I don't have graphs on this, but I showed them before, of if you allow in a certain level of imports, you can't ever push it down too low if the country you're importing from has too high of a concentration.
Because you can almost be guaranteed that the people coming in are going
to. Well, you guarantee a certain percentage will come in, and yes, they'll be dropping cases. But when you have dropping cases here, and you get another one on top of that, it keeps going, and you get this straight line effect.
And those imported ones, by definition, are going to be, like, in the beginning, they're going to be ones that are not being traced until they show up, because it's not going to be like, if I'm a contact of somebody, I already know I need to look out and maybe stay, keep myself at home and all that kind of stuff because I'm a contact. But an imported case doesn't know anything about that, so they're not behaving in that cautious way, and they're popping up from nowhere as far as public health is concerned, because they aren't monitoring them until they show up as cases.
Yeah, and that's why the hotel quarantining is so important. It's that you can monitor, and even when they leave them, like in New Zealand, where they're required to do their tracking themselves, it means if it does break out, that there's a tracking system there in place, for that small fraction that will always break through. I mean, this is why I dislike, and I have raised that the idea of it being called zero. It's zero COVID. It's such a rallying call. It makes sense. That it just, for an Irishman, it just doesn't. It's zero tolerance of allowing this to escape. Zero mystery cases. All these things that we have TB in the country still. And we, like, our kids aren't vaccinated against TB anymore.
Are they not?
No, not the last 4 or 5 years.
Okay, mine were.
The BCG was done away with as a normal part. But we in our hospitals, they know the procedures for what happens when they're all different. All these diseases, the real, like, if this wasn't a pre-symptomatic spreading disease, we wouldn't have had half the issues, because symptoms. Yeah, you're the guy, and you don't have symptoms. That means we don't have to worry about your contacts. We can just keep you there. We don't have to necessarily go on.
That's what made Ebola easier in a strange way. Like, Ebola is a terrible disease, but there wasn't much time between catching it and showing signs of it. Yeah,
and I suppose when I said that, the exact thing as I raised with Jerry, and then he kind of, you do know there's such a thing as Ebola. I was like, no, don't say that. don't. It's just rarer, and because it's so much rarer, that it's not. Just, this is so common. It's like full 2 days before you show symptoms that you're spreading it, and that's just.
But this is where one of the things we also need from the government is, the test tracing system, the testing tracing system, has been ramped up dramatically, but it needs to be even faster. And this is the thing Sam McConkey was saying you want it all to happen in the same day. I turn up for a test. I want to get my result in an hour, and my contacts be informed later that same day as well, because otherwise, every few days you delay, it's a few days these people walking around potentially infecting other people. And so, that information is powerful as well.
Yeah, and they, like, and like, it's actually, and the ability, there was this comment that it was academic or something to go back 14 days, but that's exactly what public health doctors have been doing when they've had the opportunity to do so, because that's how they're able to cut out those cases.
I wasn't sure what I remember when it was Philip Nolan, I think, said it, but I wasn't sure he was saying it was academic, therefore worthless. I thought he was trying to say it's something I don't know, actually, maybe I should listen back again. I thought he was trying to say it's something that could be done, but I don't know, maybe I'll check again what he said, because I think I didn't, my perception at the time wasn't that he was dismissing it as worthless and saying it's academic, it's worthless. I think I thought he was trying to say something else. It was like, we're in such a crisis. we don't have time for it almost, because but yeah, there's the argument that, like what you're saying as well, you need to be driving with your eyes open.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Yeah, I mean, that I wasn't really referring to the trace back on that. That's just like they are overworked. There's no way you can possibly manage to do a full 14-day back trace.
Yeah, no,
I mean, it's
possible.
and like it's just not.
But
We
let's
even
talk
thought
about where we are now. Do you have any more slides, or we have?
it's they're more theoretical
Yeah.
slides. Stop sharing and see do I have where we are now.
One thing, like I think people want to know, okay, so where we are now is we have a high caseload and we have a lot of B117. And, what people have heard is that people, some members of NEFIT saying you can never get to zero, it's impossible. And people talking about essentially having to live with lockdown restrictions until the vaccines are rolled out, which is the end of the year, something like that, or at least towards the end of the year. And so I think that it's been presented as something that, we've gone too far now and there's no coming back from it. But you say that if we did it right, even with B117, which is much more infectious, and it's our biggest challenge at the moment, but even with B117, if we did it right, if we really cut our contacts so that we were, as much as possible, only seeing people in our household and not anybody else. And there's always that number of people who don't have that choice because they're working in hospitals and essential or key workers. But if everybody else really just, don't go for that coffee with a friend and all that kind of stuff, don't be thinking it's okay to meet somebody when you're walking the dog and all of those things. If we cut it right down, we could do it in 4 to 6 weeks. Even with B117.
Well, that was Andy Slavitt's thing for the previous variants. Whether it's still 4 to 6 weeks with the newer ones, it's hard to know. But just because we don't, I suppose I'm cautious here because people haven't done the data to see is there any changes to any of the other parameters other than just the transmittability. If the other parameters are the same, the transmission doesn't matter as much if it's just your same cycle family that you're meeting, because it takes the same amount of time to run through that amount of people, and they don't get to have the same interactions with others. We'll have our healthcare workers vaccinated, even if it's not perfect transmission reduction. It'll be enough.
Make a huge difference in the hospitals.
It'll make a huge difference in the hospitals from them bringing them back to their own houses and adding to those extra numbers at home that you have to worry about.
And presumably, inadvertently, because we know everyone in the hospitals have been working so hard, but presumably inadvertently they have sometimes been vectors as well between patients, carrying it not only home but potentially to another patient. That will, when the healthcare workers are vaccinated, that'll reduce then as well.
Yeah, because I haven't heard any examples on it. It's an impossible situation to do right now. You're depending totally on, I wouldn't comment on that because it's something that public health doctors or the people who are investigating inside the hospitals would be more in a position to do. I tend to look at in every bit of healthcare I tend to work in. It tends to be more at the population level rather than individual cases. I try not to comment on individuals because that's what.
So with B117,
and if the timeframes haven't changed, there's even a possibility that it could end up being a quicker one, but there's also possibilities it could be longer. Now, why it could end up being quicker is because instead of you infecting your partner, infecting your kids, and then them going on to infect their kids, it could be a case of that the single person infects everybody
in the household on the same day,
same time, and it cuts down.
So you don't have to, so you don't have serial infections of different members of the family.
Infections.
You've got everybody infected in a single event, essentially, super spreader breakfast.
Yeah. And that cuts down the total time because then everybody's starting at a different starting point.
Which is not something we want to happen, of course. We don't want to, I just have to be careful. We don't make it sound like we think it's a good thing that it goes up to every member of the family. No,
but it happened. This is what happened over Christmas.
In your family.
This is what happened over Christmas, with some families and GPs reporting that there was 100%, nearly 80% to 100% hit rates in some families, whereas in previous times it was 20 to 25%. So we were seeing over Christmas a lot more total family incidents, and we heard the same in England. I've a client whose UK family have had like grandmother, mother, like the entire family in hospital at the same time.
Oh wow. Okay.
You know, so it's not something we want, but it's something that is going to happen either way. So it's not like we're saying we want it to happen. It's just we don't get a choice in these matters. If it's in the house, it's in the house. Yes, in China they were able to take people out of the house.
Yeah.
Yes, and if you've got a non-family situation, you might think about these supported isolation ideas in where you can take out a certain amount of people.
When you say non-family, you're talking about a group of
a group of co-workers, or let's say an overcrowded situation where you know, we have the City West facility for that. I don't know how much it's been used, but making sure that, you know, focusing in on testing. Instead, this idea of what Slovakia did, where they try and test the entire population, and it didn't work out particularly well because you had behavioral problems.
Where? Sorry, I missed.
Slovakia.
Oh, Slovakia.
And you say the same in Liverpool, and we tried these mass testing experiments, but they run into the problem where you get behavioral countering. So you got false negatives.
Yeah. And then people feel emboldened.
Because they're not, because the term should never be negative. It's non-detections.
Yep.
Because the sensitivity just isn't enough to say that it's negative. So whereas the specificity is so high that you can pretty much say that a detection is a positive.
Yeah.
The inverse is not really true.
Yeah.
So that's the issue there.
So if we were summing up then, so your models and the model and they aren't only yours. I mean, this is what other people do as well. So you're basically taking in the case information and the cases over the last few days, and that gives you last week or so, and that gives you an estimation of the number of infected people, and some of those are infectious. And you can say, you know, if things continue as they are and people have these number of interactions over the next period, we're going to see the cases increase in this way, and the models are pretty accurate. The predictions have been quite accurate.
I know getting a model to be correct is they're not predictions, they're scenarios, and if people behave according to those scenarios, it turns out to be right. Unfortunately, that's what happened in Christmas. But had people not behaved that way, it wasn't already baked in. Or, you know, there's nothing baked in. If on December 15th, when the GP's signals was raised, the government said, oh no, let's make sure this doesn't happen, the numbers were, if it goes on, this is what was going to happen. That's why we did the thing on December 21st when we got everything together. You know, had they done something back on when they had the information back on December 15th, what happened over Christmas wouldn't have happened. Yeah. Same with B117. Now it wasn't even an issue here because we did tell the government. We did have a meeting. Yeah, we had our meeting. So we also had a meeting with IMAG to tell them that this was coming. What's happening now was happening. Just drag up something. I'll show you what's talking about. But I think it's quite encouraging to think, and I personally take some hope from the idea that even at the moment, you know, we could potentially have 4 to 6 weeks if we really kept ourselves to our households. If we repeated April. If we repeated April, we could do it. And we have more in our toolkit than we had in April, because now we have masks and we also know about the importance of ventilation. So, you know, people can wear masks if they think, you know, if somebody in their household has been in maybe a high risk situation, like a hospital or something, you know, you can wear masks at home and you can ventilate well at home, and that's going to make a big difference. And I think one of the kind of the descriptions of how to know if the place is well ventilated or not is to think, if there was smoke, like cigarette smoke or something, would you smell it or not? And you know, like, you know, so let the wind blow through, but there's the air blow through. But I find it quite encouraging that we could do that still. And in any case, starting from today, I mean, the schools are closed for at least another month. I mean, we were talking a bit earlier about, you know, in terms of opening schools and when will that be possible and if it'll be possible. And with the B117 being so infectious,
It does seem tricky in terms of schools, at least the way they were open last term, where we had the school children in the same room, a bit spaced out, but still in the same room.
Yeah,
does seem tricky. Okay, what are you showing? You're looking
so
at here.
Here, just looking at B117. Now, this was raised as a likely scenario back in the start of January, and that's why when the government when Michael Martin came out on the 6th, we were kind of hoping, okay, he's going to define what essential work is, and he's going to make sure that it's just going to be that. And then we saw by the 9th there was no difference at all. There was no change in any patterns. There was no change. You could instantly tell that there was no effect, because they hadn't defined.
No effect of what? Sorry.
Of the, remember in the early part of January, the teacher came out and mentioned that there was a change to what we were going to be doing, that you should be working from home and all this should be, could, should, but we're never going to try for anything ambitious. So why bother?
Yeah.
I mean, this is the thing. I don't blame anybody for not trying to do anything, because there's the government haven't given any direction on what we could be trying to do.
I think it's very hard for people, because we don't know what we're aiming for, and this is very frustrating. I find it personally very frustrating. We're
basically aiming and then hoping that the vaccine will sort it out, and that we won't have any anti-vaxxers, which thankfully in Ireland all the surveys are showing we don't. But like if you look at France or America,
but also the number, the vaccine resistant strains, I'm worried about that potentially.
Well, I don't know.
Like in other countries where they've got a more significant anti-vax sentiment.
Yeah, I mean, I'm like, so far there's been no hospitalizations or deaths from people who've had the vaccine, from COVID. So that's hopefully, like, the mutation so far. Hopefully, we have shown that one. We've talked about ourselves before about the one that showed up in that Italian lab experiment a couple of times after the current one that showed up in B117 just in the last week in the UK.
E484K.
Yeah.
This mutation. So this is at position 484 in the spike protein, where an E changed to a K, which is a glutamic acid to a lysine, I think. So just this mutation, which helps it avoid being neutralized by the antibodies.
Yeah, but only to a certain fraction. Whereas the next insertion, and I have no idea what that insertion was, because it's definitely in your course, whatever that one, where it went down a considerable amount portion again, and then of course you worry is what happens when we get antibodies to those mutations. Will we be back into another cycle again and again and again until we decide that we've had enough, we're getting rid of it, and then we go to the next country and we try and get them numbers low enough so the vaccines can work without having to worry about another mutation.
Yeah.
So anyway, they said in this graph here, we show that the numbers are going down wonderfully, exactly as we hope, except that it tends to be just the older version. And the blue bars there are the B117 components. These aren't models. So this is just
these are recorded.
These are using the values that NEFIT have published.
Why is the y-axis so high?
It's
because it's over a whole week. Okay, yeah. No, because I was thinking we never had 30,000 cases in a day, but sorry, it's a week.
It's a week, yeah.
Wow.
And it's lab detections as well rather than cases. So that's why it's a bit more smoother than those graphs. Like those graphs that were going around the world and data ones. They're showing, oh, look at Ireland's big spike and big decrease since. Yeah, because we had a data error. That meant all the previous ones were bumped up.
Because of all those days when they couldn't report them, when we knew it was low, when we knew the report was lower, and we also knew roughly by how much it was lower, because we knew there was just the final verification step that was waiting.
And again, that type of information is not going to make it onto the American news channels or anywhere else. So, they think, oh, look at Ireland, it's so bad, and oh, look at Ireland, it's so good. Look at Ireland, we made a mess up of our data systems.
Yeah, league tables are of COVID.
Yeah, they're so pointless.
So basically, this week by week, so these are the real data we see. So the blue is the B117.
The blue is the B1 components based on what they measured as a percentage. So now the only concern I have is in week 1, I think there was possibly disproportionately towards the east of the country samples were taken.
Okay, so they were searching for B117 rather than just sequencing randomly.
I think it was more to do with it being the Christmas period or something. Yeah. I don't know the exact reasons, but it wasn't a representative sample in that week. I think it might be.
That highest one might be slightly inflated.
It's slightly inflated.
We definitely do see, obviously, from the last weeks of 2020 where it was low, it's gone up, and now we see, if we look across weeks 2, 3, 4, it has come down in those weeks, but not as much as the overall has come down. So it is stubborn in a sense.
Stubborn, yeah. It's just, and it's going to be like this on any degree of, like at the moment I said that all the patterns were very stable. Any kind of increase in or relaxation from our current point might turn us around, and it could turn it around very, very quickly. And especially, so remember, B117 doesn't, the original version had no particular concerns about reinfection, because it didn't, or on the vaccine itself, it's small, tiny little random fluctuations. It's the mutation you mentioned there.
Yeah.
That is concerned. Now, it has happened in B117 in the UK last week. It's what's in the one from Brazil, the one that was first detected in Brazil, the one that was first detected in
so this particular mutation has occurred independently multiple times in different parts of the world, and possibly multiple times even in Britain. And it's because there is basically natural selection for this mutation, because it increases the competitive advantage of the virus. It transmits better. And that's classic natural selection.
And it just, these blue lines, if it turns out that it becomes that variant, will start going up, because even in their current situations, because we'll have, at the moment, the fact that a certain percentage of our population have had this infection or any of the previous ones is protecting the rest of us, and it's keeping it going down. Whereas if they're now susceptible to be reinfected, they're adding into chains of transmission.
So you mean if B117 changes again?
If it changes to have the E4A4K.
Right?
Okay. So in other words, if we keep importing it as we are from the UK, and as we are,
we're going to be doubly,
and it might have a small foothold now that we haven't been able to detect. And of course, that might die out if it's small enough before it gets a chance. I think early on they thought that you really need around, at least on average, 8 introductions for it to take a hold, non-caught. And that's where the worry is. I mean, this is a worry too, because it means we're in, like, for small businesses, from restaurants, we're not going to be able to reopen our doors until for a very, very long time,
unless we go for
we think, why are those few who are still operating? Why have they to? Because there's the costs that it will be to support them to close themselves down for the 4 to 6 weeks to really drive the fingers down is nothing compared to the cost borne by the rest of us.
This is one point. I think it was Alan Kelly raised the idea that Leo Varadkar, in his role as whatever it is, enterprise, trade, and employment, it's his domain, could be asking all of these firms to do a bit of an audit and justify why you have your staff coming in, and even just.
It's not just firms. I suppose we have to remember it's also the public sector as well. It's not. Of
course, yeah.
And that ultimately lies with the ministers who are in charge of.
Yeah. Interesting. They're not exactly.
Yeah, people always. Obviously, I'm going to be biased towards the private sector, but it's not just on the private sector. The public sector are the largest employers, and they're probably most of the people who are still going in and out.
Anyway, Paul, I think it's probably time for us to finish up, because what?
To sleep.
To sleep. No, but I'm just thinking, just to kind of wrap it up with a kind of a brief summary. So, and that's what I was trying to do a bit before. Like, so we're in this position now, but even though we're in this terrible position in terms of really high case numbers and the B117, which is a serious problem a big challenge in terms of it being more infectious, it is possible that if we do a proper lockdown like we did last year, if we do that again, and the things we now know better from last year, wearing masks and ventilation and stuff like that, we could talk about 4 to 6 weeks, we could have the numbers right down, which would make the community safer in general, in terms of talking about schools and all of these other things that we want to have open. And it would be potentially manageable then, depending on the numbers, but we hope that we get down to manageable numbers for the public health doctors. I feel like this is a plausible amount of time. That's something that people could think about and say, yes, I can kind of commit myself.
Well,
or the government can do it. Yeah, I know. I keep saying this, but it's true. It's not me committing myself. It's the employer.
We are. This is the problem. Most of us are. Even the people who are going into work, it's not that they have a choice in the matter.
Yeah. So it needs to be. So this decision needs to come from the top. This needs to be a countrywide decision, but that there's hope that we as a country can get this right back down again, and we don't have to wait until September when the vaccine's rolled out. We can talk about having a good year internally in the country, but these decisions have to be made, and it's not up to you or me to make this decision. It's the government has to do this, and they have to lead.
Yeah, and they also have to be prepared for when things go wrong. The best time to try that is right now.
Yeah.
When things go wrong, they won't be as bad a consequence because it might add on a few days. Whereas if they go really wrong when we get it low, it could end up on when they try and roll out too late.
And that's where the bringing in the hotel quarantine now, because there's going to be teething problems. So let's have those teething problems, get them over and done with. And the things, and getting public health doctors and units what they need. There's going to be training. There's going to be various things. You can't magic it out of nowhere.
Software they're looking for. Yeah, there's a piece of software they're looking for that costs $50,000 that they got approval for in 2019 that they still haven't been given for managing outbreaks.
Oh my God.
It's insane. And oh no, you don't want, and that's what they wanted. And what they were given instead was something that somebody else decided would be more suitable for them, because how would you possibly know how to do your own job?
Oh my God.
Yeah. I've seen that I've seen that in industry so often.
There's so many things. There's things that there's hope.
Yeah.
There's a path through this. We need our government to take action. That's where we'll end.
And listen to the people who are doing the work on the ground.
Yes.